Hello, everyone, and welcome to Search London. And today's talk on November the 4th, we're going to be talking about tech SEO and SEO strategies. Thank you very much to the Trainline for sponsoring us. My name is SEO Joe Blogs, and I'm co-organizer with Tim Sheed. We are having this event in the Trainline offices in central London, but for those who are unable to attend, we're also doing a pre-recorded version. So I'm really pleased to have two great speakers, Serena and David, and we're going to be talking about different ways to do your SEO. So first of all, how to actually set up an SEO strategy with Serena, and then we're going to have David talk about how his company deleted 130 million pages. So we're going to focus on the tech SEO. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to you, Serena, and you can share with us about how you are actually setting up an SEO strategy all the way from ground zero.
Cool. Thanks, Joe. So today I'll be chatting about how to set up an SEO strategy from scratch. My name is Serena Pearson. If you want to find me on Twitter, you can find me at XLDaddy. I currently work at Ocean Finance doing everything SEO for them. So let's just get straight into it. One thing I wanted to clear up is that I'm not going to talk through how to run an SEO audit. That's not the same thing as doing an SEO strategy. The difference is we're going to cover it right now. So what's an SEO audit? SEO audits are typically sort of looks like a checklist. It's quite extensive checklist. It covers a list of all the things which might be impacting your site's SEO performance. And it sort of outlines, it's more of a tech audit typically covering things like meta titles, descriptions, and it's quite extensive. The difference between that and an SEO strategy is that a strategy is a plan of action that is designed to help achieve a long-term or overall aim. So also known as a master plan or like an actual game plan, what this means in terms of SEO. Example long-term goals or aims can include perhaps ranking in the top 3 positions for your primary keyword. Maybe you want to be improving your visibility for generic searches or improving your traffic relevancy and improving conversion rates. So these are examples of different long-term goals that you may be wanting to look at from an SEO perspective. And so a strategy, in my opinion, is simply this. It's what you want to achieve and then setting out how you're actually going to be getting there. So that's not quite the same as an SEO audit, which is more a checklist of SEO problems. However, that's not to say an audit isn't important at all. It's more the foundation of the strategy. You still need to run one in order to figure out where you're going to be going. Now, looking at the auditing process in a lot more detail, it's typically quite extensive. So if you're like me, you're probably going to be running a crawl, and that can be so many things that you want to look at. So you can look at duplication issues, if there's multiple H1 issues, if there's a problem with the length of the meta titles, if you're having a problem with canonical tags, JavaScript SEO, schema markup, page speed, so many things that you can look at when you're running a crawl. And it's quite important to look at everything because you don't know where you need to focus your attention otherwise. Another thing is also looking at your performance. So perhaps you might be looking at the distribution of traffic across different pages or seeing where your pages are currently ranking, the split in terms of where your traffic is actually coming from and which keywords you're targeting, how they're converting as well. So there's so many ways that you can segment your website's performance too. Then you also want to be looking beyond sort of just performance and tech SEO into the backlink profile and your digital PR activity. So looking at the distribution of backlinks you have, the quality of them as well, and whatever metrics that you want to be measuring, how you're going to be categorizing these links. On top of that, you might want to be making some manual checks and actually read the website, going through your header navigation. Can you find the content you want to find? Essentially, the auditing process, as you can tell, I'm running out of breath, can be very extensive because there are so many different things that you want to be looking at one go. And it's seemingly everything is also important to look at because if you're looking at one thing, what if you're missing something somewhere else? And if you're working at an agency and perhaps putting together a pitch, this is just way too much work and too many things to be looking at in such a short period of time. Typically, in my experience working in an agency, you're given maybe 1 or 2 weeks to put together a pitch on top of all the other work and responsibilities that you have to do. So it's simply just not possible to look at all of these things and put together a comprehensive SEO strategy. Now, if you're working in-house, it's still way too much work. It's still a lot going on because what you don't want to end up doing is sinking all your time into analysis and not actually taking action for what you find. So One way to help with this is, of course, doing templates. There are so many templates available online to help you automate your SEO. This is just a snippet in terms of how I do my technical SEO template. I prefer this because it essentially takes exports from Screaming Frog, and I can really customize it to how I like. And because I'm auditing so many websites, I do like to customize all of my crawls. But if you prefer doing an SEO tool or using an SEO tool that captures it all, Deep Crawl is a good option, but there's so many other tools available like Ahrefs, SEMrush, all the industry standards. So this is quite important to have as part of the auditing process. Otherwise, you're just going to end up spending a lot of time just looking at these metrics. However, even once you do automate it and you can look at the areas that you want to prioritize and focus on, this is still an audit. It's not necessarily a strategy. So in order to actually get a strategy out of it, you have to get wider non-SEO context, because then that's how you put together a proper plan of action and prioritize your work beyond just SEO. So the first thing you really need to do is get to know your industry a lot better. So this may seem pretty obvious, but do you know your product? The content that's on your website is meant to add value to your customers. It's meant to help them make a better decision about their purchase, if they even should be buying your product at all. And how are you supposed to help your customers even if you don't know how the product actually works? If it's possible, try out the product if you have the time, or even if you're working in-house, see if you can get a sample, just so that you understand what customers are looking at and what you yourself are thinking as you're experiencing the product. This may sound silly, but I have worked for quite a few automotive companies and done SEO work for them. And I don't even have a driving license, which, that doesn't mean to say I can't do good SEO for them. But if I know how to drive, I can probably write better guides on how to actually drive or fix your car or things like that. So this really can help you elevate your content. The second thing to look at is what your customer journey looks like. So you're probably familiar with the upper, middle, and bottom funnel content, and looking at the user journey, but looking at it from a search perspective. So I've mapped it out here. Is first, people are aware that there's a problem that they need fixing, or they need a solution to something. They're going to be researching different products available and different solutions to their problems, getting to the actual product that they may want to buy, finding your brand, and then perhaps getting back in contact with them, engaging with them, perhaps returning an item, things like that. So this is quite important to understand, because we need to know where we want to be focusing our attention on in the user journey. Now, typically it's right to left. You want your brand to rank really well, then products, and work your way back. However, different industries have different priorities. Some industries, some people don't even know what they're looking for. So creating content around products isn't the best idea, because people aren't even searching for your product if you're really on the cutting edge of your industry. So it's important to understand how long customers take in each particular section. A good indicator for that is looking at search volume, but it's beyond just that. It's actually getting to know it a bit better. And the last question in this section is pretty much understanding how important SEO is in the overall marketing mix. So this is extremely important, because it just goes to show where you should be focusing your attention. So again, different industries have different priorities. For example, if your company or the brand that you're working with has a lot of focus on content and social media, you're going to want to make sure that the content on your website is aligned to that, so that once, if a lot of traffic comes through social media and they're landing on the website, it should look very similar, and your content strategy should be aligned for that. So that's just one example, but there's so much more. Don't just think about it as just SEO and PPC. Think about it as in the wider context of everything else. The second thing to look at is understanding business priorities. So which product do you want to focus your attention to? Now, if you're working with a brand that may have multiple products, actually understand where you should be focusing your attention. Some of it may be obvious, but you obviously want to get confirmation from your team and understanding from the business as a whole. So if your business offers multiple products, understand how each of them are performing, where the opportunities are from an SEO perspective, but also what the priorities are from a business perspective, and you can consolidate the two. Another thing that's very important to consider is where does your product sit within the market and what is your USP? Because this will really, really help you with your relevancy and keyword targeting. You don't want to be going after keywords which you really don't even need. Beyond that, as well as understanding what competitors in the space is actually offering and if you can even compete. Now, there are different tools that offer, competitiveness metrics. So in AdWords, I believe you have that as an option, and I think a few other tools have sort of a number that's assigned to the competitiveness. But ultimately, it is a number. It is assigned by a machine. You, as a person, can go to their competitor's website and understand why that is, why they are more competitive, and see if there's anything that you can do to remain competitive yourself in the market. And the fourth thing to look at is practically looking at what you're actually able to achieve. So as mentioned earlier, you want to streamline and automate a lot of the SEO auditing process as well, but that also includes looking at automating SEO performance analysis. So in order to identify where you're at now and where you want to be in the future, a lot of that involves keyword research ultimately, and also analysis of your website's performance. The more you can automate that portion of the analysis, the better, because otherwise you are going to be sinking a huge amount of time identifying those two areas and filling in the gaps. But once you do identify this gap, you can put together your plan of action, and then that becomes your strategy. One tip I have is to also know your strengths as well. So if you are setting up a strategy from scratch, know your strengths and where you actually need help, and know when to ask for additional resources. Because if there may be someone else in your team or a way for you to get additional resource and they have their own strengths, you can work together and build an even better strategy. The last tip I have is pretty much to keep abreast of trends. So keep an eye on what's going on. You may have your long-term strategy and it may be robust, but things are always changing. I don't think any of us expected a pandemic 1.5 years ago. So things are always changing. Make sure you keep an eye out on it and don't fall behind. So I've given here a few examples of how some of the more major algorithm updates in the last decade or so. Now, while it has slowed down slightly compared to Panda, Penguin, Hummingbird all happening seemingly at once, there's always algorithm updates that are being made. So keep an eye out in the news for that as well. I'm a big fan of Search Engine Journal. There's always great. They keep up to date really well. Another way to keep up to date is looking at digital PR activity in order to identify new content trends as well as declining trends. So of course you can do seasonality analysis and look at your keyword research and keep it fresh. But before people are actually searching for, whatever trends, they need to be informed of what's actually happening. So a good way to look at that is at publications and news sources, and just keep an eye out on that. You can set up Google Alerts, and there's different ways to look at that, such as journal requests. So you don't need to necessarily sink all of your time into this, but just understanding what's going on in the news is quite important in terms of keeping your content fresh. Last tip I have, keep an eye on your competitors. I'm keeping it quite simple here. You can monitor in all sorts of different ways. You can use your SEO rank tracking tools. You can look at it from a digital PR perspective, but in order to stay competitive, you have to look at your competitors. So that's quite critical component as part of your SEO strategy. It's not just a checklist of what you're doing. It's also looking at what everyone else is doing and how you fit into that beyond just your company. And those are my 4 main tips in summary to elevate your audit into an actual strategy. This might be helpful if, say, you're an exec, perhaps looking to progress in your career and you want to take on more responsibility. This can hopefully help you achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Serena. That was a lot of information that you shared with us, also from personal experience. I had a question actually about sort of setting up your SEO strategy from scratch, more like maybe a time. How much time would you think that you need to do this?
Yeah.
Ideally, because you mentioned, when you're doing pitches, like you get told a couple of weeks, but obviously you're working on other things. If you're an SEO strategy either in-house or on pitches, how much do you think is ideal if it's one person?
One person. So because I recently joined the whole Think Money group, I can tell you how much time it's taken me since I've joined. With that, onboarding is very important part of that. So one of the things I covered in the presentation is actually understanding the business and make sure you take your time with that. So it was a solid 2 weeks of me interviewing every single person I could. Now, of course, every organization has a different size. So if you're a much smaller one, it might take a few days. Whereas the company I'm at, there's a couple hundred people. So I didn't interview everyone, but I interviewed a good portion of people, and that took 2 weeks. Then following that, it was 2.5 to 3 weeks of intense reviewing. The one thing to mention is that they only have one product, so it's debit cards, which I was looking at. So if you have a lot more products, it will take more time. But even if you do have 10, 20 different products, you're not going to necessarily spend 10 or 20 months doing it. So I would limit the amount of time you spend on it, including onboarding, maybe 1 month or 1 to 2 months. If you have nothing else to do, which if you have nothing else to do, if you have other stuff to do, it might take longer.
Okay, well, thank you. That's a very realistic timeline. David, do you have any questions for Serena?
One that came to mind, you mentioned Search Engine Journal, and I was just wondering if you have any other recommendations of blogs or specific articles that you'd recommend on the topic.
Yeah, Search Engine Land's really good. I think they've done a wrap-up recently. I think Carolyn Linden, she does a wrap-up every Wednesday, I'm pretty sure. And also, I forgot her name. I think it's Aleda. So she keeps up to date with all the different SEO news. I think my favorite SEO author is Matt Southern at Search Engine Journal. I'm always following his stuff as well. So yeah, those are my favorites.
Yeah, I just wanted to shout out again about the Aleda Solis's FOMO newsletter. That's every Sunday. There's also Moon and Tech SEO newsletter, which is once a month. And yes, Matt Southern at Search Engine Journal. He has a lot of information, as well as obviously a lot of the Carolyn, as you mentioned. There's a lot of information there. I still also like to look at Moz too. Okay, well, thank you very much, Serena, for all that. And for those that didn't attend Search London in person, you can contact Serena by contacting her at Excel Daddy, but you're also on Twitter, correct?
Yeah.
Sorry, LinkedIn.
Yeah, either way.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to pass now over. Yeah, thank you for joining us, Serena. I'm going to pass now over to David Lewis, who is at the Trainline, and he's going to be telling us a very interesting story about how they deleted 130 million pages. So he's going to be looking at SEO from a technical perspective. So I will pass over to you, David.
Thank you, Joe. Hello, Search London. Today I'm going to be telling you the story of our crawlability project nicknamed Black Widow, and why we decided to delete 130 million pages and what we learned along the way. Let's jump straight in. So we really felt
just checking. Can you see your presentation? It's not showing yet on my end.
Oh.
So yeah, I'm just looking at it live. It's not showing yet, so let's try that again. Oh, there we go. Yes. So if you go back to the front, maybe it was because it was in present mode. Maybe something happened.
Okay.
We can see that. Yeah.
Should we just do it in this mode? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if you can expand it a bit more in the bottom right-hand corner. Yeah.
1 second.
Yeah, because maybe the other way didn't work. But okay. Your slides also will be available after the event.
Yes.
Okay,
absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Sorry for that. I'll go behind the scenes.
No worries. So we really felt like the child at the top of these bales of hay, where the bales of hay represented Trainline's architecture, and we had all these millions of pages, and we didn't really know truly where the value was, because it had kind of expanded over time. And I also think that the bales of hay represent Googlebot's and Google's understanding of kind of where our value was. So they're crawling through all these pages, but where's the value? Where isn't the value? So we really had a problem with crawl budget. And from that, we also felt like we were kind of throwing money away, because we didn't know if Google was crawling the right pages at the right time. Before I go any further, I'm just going to quickly introduce myself. So I'm David Lewis. I'm the Senior Technical SEO Manager at Trainline. I've been here for a little over 3.5 years, and in SEO for 6.5. Inside and outside of work, I'm a keen advocate of personal development. Love to meditate. I play the guitar. I love all sports in the world, and I love going to the gym as well. I'd love it if you would connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always looking to knowledge share and learn from others in the industry. And Trainline, I hope most listening today know who Trainline are, but we are the world's leading independent rail and coach travel platform. We sell tickets on behalf of 270 rail and coach companies. We operate all around Europe, and we have a really cool app. And finally, we have 90 million visits per month, and 3/4 of these are on mobile. Right, back to the meat of the talk. So it really did all start with crawl budget. And just to set the scene, I'll quickly define what crawl budget is. So it's crawl rate limit plus crawl demand. Crawl rate limit is all to do with how fast are the pages. Are there any errors on those pages? And then crawl demand is concerning how stale are the pages, how fresh are they, and so on. So the combination of the two gives you crawl budget. And basically, Google only has a finite number of resources. They can't crawl through an unlimited amount of pages. So it's really imperative that we as SEOs are directing them to the pages that are valuable. The link below, the Spotify link, gives you some really good information on crawl budget. So how do we get to a place of so much bloat? Well, it's primarily because the customer came to us rather than us going to them, and I'll explain what I mean by this. So this is a view of our London to Paris train times page, and today I'm going to be talking primarily about the train times pages, and these are basically route-to-route combinations. So on this London to Paris page, you can see the search bar in front of you. So if the customer was to search for, let's say, London to Paris, they get through to the booking widget, the booking flow, sorry, and they'll be able to purchase a ticket. Let's say they search for another route, sea salt to Munich, which is a small route in Germany. If they search for that route and we didn't have a page live for that search, there was a mechanism in place that would automatically create a new page, but it wouldn't just create a new page in English, it would create a new page in the 5 core languages that we serve, so French, Italian, English, German, and Spanish. But the problem with that is that in the case of sea salt to Munich, it's not taking into account localized search demand. So what we needed to do is actually go to the customer instead. And so we set about trying to understand where the customer was searching and what the pages that were valuable. So we define value in 3 main ways: using external data through the Google Ads API, and internal data through Google Search Console API and Google Analytics. So for Google Ads, we queried millions and millions of route combinations across Europe to understand which routes were valuable in each of the 5 markets. And then we combined that data with Google Search Console data. So this was impressions data. So I think if any page had one single impression in the last 2.5 years, it would be included in the list. And the reason we chose 2.5 years is because we wanted to account for seasonality and make sure that also we're including pre-COVID data to get an accurate read on demand. And then we also added into the mix Google Analytics data. So this was any page that had a single session or more in the 2.5 year period. And what we did is we got a blend of the 3, and we got 5 lists, 1 in each market of the pages that were valuable. So what was the data showing, and why really did we start the project in the first place? As I mentioned, it all came down to crawl budget, and we dug into the data once we had the list of valuable pages and realized that it was taking Google on average 1 to 3 weeks to crawl the valuable pages. Now, the problem with this is if Google is crawling that infrequently, it means that the lead time between us publishing a new change and actually Google picking up is longer. So it means that it takes longer for Google to improve our rankings and so on. So it's a real knock-on effect. Secondly, of the valuable pages, only 36% of all calls were not to non-valuable pages. So that was a huge amount of wastage. And we did really feel like Gordon Ramsay here. Are you kidding me? In terms of internal linking architecture, only 36% of the pages were discoverable in the internal links. And actually of that 36%, some of those weren't valuable pages either. So we had a mix of valuable and invaluable pages in the architecture, just because that's kind of how it went over time. So to represent this, I've shown the Venn diagram on the right-hand side. So just to explain what this is, crawled by Spotify only, means that it's part of the internal linking architecture, but Google hasn't crawled it. In the red section, that's basically orphan pages, so they're only crawled by Google and they're not part of our internal linking architecture, because Spotify will only crawl through what's in our internal links. And then we have the purple section, which is basically the sweet spot, the place where really we want it to be. We want really these circles to merge to become a total purple circle. And at that point in time, in April last year, when we started the project, only 800,000 of these URLs were actually called by Google and Spotify. So our project goals, we set out to delete 130 million pages that had no value. At the same time, we also wanted to make sure that all of our valuable pages were linked to in the architecture. So we wanted to achieve 100% internal link coverage. We set the goal of achieving 90% Googlebot crawl share to valuable pages. So basically 9 out of every 10 pages that's crawled each month is valuable. We shied away from going for 100%. And the reason being that we had kind of some uncontrollables. Google was crawling 301s and other legacy pages. And it was kind of difficult for us we knew that it would be very difficult to get to 100%. So as a result, we decided to go with the 90% mark, which was still a strong percentage. And then we also wanted to improve the average position of optimized URLs. So we categorized an optimized URL as any URL that used to be an orphan page that now became part of the internal linking architecture. And the reason for that is that we know that link equity is a ranking factor. So passing link value to these pages that never had it before should lead to an improvement in ranking. So the first step on this journey, once we set out our goals, was to build our new internal linking architecture. So we got around a whiteboard with our developer team, and we sought out trying to figure out how we could leverage our train times pages to get through all of the links. And as a kind of side note to this project, it was quite a big learning around our dev team. We have a really good relationship internally with our dev team, and this project would not be possible without them. And it's taken, kind of quite a few years to get to this place, relationship building and making sure that we're educating them on SEO. And we really are now at a place where our goals are aligned with their goals on a yearly and a quarterly basis. So I feel like that's a really kind of good sub-learning from this project. So I'm pleased to say that we did get to 100% internal link coverage, and we did it through using our looking for more ideas section on our train times pages. So we basically have 3 columns here. The first 2 columns are giving value to the highest value pages on our website, basically. So the London to Parises or the Paris to Lyons and so on. And then the ideas for more other routes. So the third column is basically enabling us to get to 100% coverage, because we're taking all the routes that are still valuable, but slightly less valuable than the highest value routes. And we're basically going down kind of a list. It gets down to the bottom of the list and it goes straight back up to the top. And it basically just enables us to get to 100% coverage through this algorithm that the developers created. At the same time as improving our internal linking architecture, we orphaned 1.5 million pages. So these are pages that, when we ran the value analysis, were part of our internal linking architecture, but we actually realized that we were giving equity and value to pages that serve no purpose to us. So we removed them from the architecture. And then we waited 6 months. And the reason we did that is for a couple of reasons. We wanted to make sure that we were ready for the deletion. So we were, even though we orphaned those pages kind of dynamically with the help of the devs, we still needed to cut off some kind of rogue internal links that were part of the CMS. So we gave ourselves time to do that, but we also wanted to make sure that we could see what was happening with the crawl data when we orphaned the pages, to see if actually that was enough or whether we did have to go through and delete the pages. So we did observe an improvement in crawl performance, but it actually wasn't enough. So that 800K became 1.7 million, which is great. But as you can see, there was still quite a large number of orphan pages crawled. So we really needed to delete these pages and then observe what would happen to crawl performance after that. So we deleted the pages. And at this stage, we only deleted 5 million, and I'll come on to the other 125 million later in the presentation. So what this looked like was on the left-hand side here, we've got the pages that we deleted, and we set them as a 410 status code. And what that basically means is we're telling Google these pages are gone and don't ever come back, they're deleted. On the other side of it, we had the pages that remained. And in our language picker, as you can see on the bottom right here, for this German route, we used to have the Spanish route for this, but actually we realized it wasn't valuable, so we removed it. And that's kind of what we did. So only the pages that were valuable remained in the language picker. And actually that language picker is linked to our hreflang as well. But as I mentioned, 5 million was definitely not enough, and 125 pages needed to be deleted. And actually these pages were discovered kind of midway through the project. Right at the start of the project, we thought we only had about 5 million, but we actually found that there was a whole another huge amount of pages that we needed to sort out. So these pages were basically duplicate versions of our UK train times pages. So that basically just means routes within the UK, so London to Manchester, Edinburgh to Birmingham, and so on. And these pages lived on 6 subdomains. And I think in the UK, there are roughly 12.5 million route-to-route combinations. So we found that there was about 62.5 million. And then we realized that we had an HTTP and an HTTPS version of these pages, which wasn't ideal. So, and I think it's because when we did the migration many years ago, these pages were kind of hidden from our view. Anyway, so we basically had 12, in total 12 duplicate versions of these pages that had absolutely no value whatsoever. And as a result, they were a total waste of crawl budget. So as you can see on the right-hand side here, this was a view from Google's new crawl stats report. And actually this report gave us an idea of these pages and the fact they were being crawled. So obviously relative to the TLD, it wasn't that many crawl requests, but really we're still talking about a multi-million number of crawl requests to pages that serve no value to us whatsoever. So we decided to delete them. And actually I think this crawl report really helped us, because before we just didn't have a view on these pages, and it's because in our log analysis that we do in Botify, these subdomains weren't part of that. So once we did that, we monitored, and we did this through uploading sitemaps into Google Search Console that contains the pages that we deleted. So actually a quick shout out to Tristan from Ticketmaster, a friend of mine who we were speaking about the project, and we were trying to figure out the best way to manage de-indexation. He came up with this idea. So really what we were able to do is upload them into GSC, and then as you can see here, kind of monitor the green and making sure that it was going down over time. And actually, just as a quick side note, the errors you can see here, we found out were actually correlated with these pages being excluded from the index. They were just in a separate place within GSC. So in about 6 weeks, 86% of these pages were removed from the index. And then when it got to just the end of January this year, we decided to remove these sitemaps from GSC. And the reason for this is because we were getting to a place of diminishing returns where Google was not crawling these pages, was crawling our 410s a lot. And it almost felt like it was negating the point of the project, because we wanted to for them not to crawl the 410s. So they were coming back and crawling these pages, even if they're being de-indexed over and over. So we decided to remove the sitemaps from GSC and kind of accept that 86% was a huge amount of pages de-indexed in that space. So then moving on to the results. So I'm really pleased to say that Google bot crawl share for valuable pages did improve over time from 64% to actually a peak of 87%. We saw that peak in July, and actually, as you can see here, we've seen a slight dip in the last couple of months, but I think we're realizing that this is actually quite natural, and crawls aren't linear, and I'll come on to that later in the deck. But really what we saw here is between stage 1 and stage 2, so when we did the orphaning and the internal linking and the 410s, we saw quite a big fluctuation in crawl share, where Google were coming in, crawling valuable pages, crawling a whole load of non-valuable pages, and so on. But since we've done the 410s, aside from some early fluctuation, we've actually seen a kind of slow upward trend of improvement in crawl share, meaning that Google is crawling valuable pages more and more. And even though they're crawling 410s still at this moment, it's less and less over time. So in terms of crawl performance, we saw a 238% increase in URLs crawled by Google and Botify on a monthly basis from where we started. So that 800K has actually become 2.7 million. And as I mentioned earlier in the talk, we want that. We want it to be basically just one big purple circle, and we're getting closer and closer to that. Obviously, as you can see, we've still got a number of orphan pages crawled, and it's because we still haven't quite finished this project. We have a little bit more work we need to do in the UK, but we are nearly there. From a ranking perspective, we saw pages that were linked to for the first time that were ranking before jump from P8 to P6 on average. And although I can't share specific business numbers today, we have seen that correlate to business metrics as well, which is really great to see. From a depth perspective, we went from an average of 7 to 5 and really reduced the distribution of depth. So just to quickly mention depth, it's basically the number of clicks from the homepage, and the closer a page is to the homepage, basically Google sees that as more valuable. And this was really a bonus from this project. We weren't focusing on depth. We just wanted to make sure all the pages were part of the architecture. So it was really great to see that this improvement as well. Onto the learnings, and I think this is probably my favorite part of the talk, as we really saw quite a few along the way. So from a sitemap perspective, we realized it isn't enough just to remove the sitemaps from Google Search Console to prevent crawling. You must actually delete the files too. So physically delete them on the server so that they're a 404 for Google or 410. Also, we actually realized that deleting these sitemap files wasn't enough. And we realized it because we found Google's long-term memory. So this was a concept I'd never heard of before I started the project. And as we were doing research, we came across it. And what that basically means is if a page is being in the index at any moment in time, even if it's de-indexed, Google will periodically come back and crawl these pages. Now, the problem with that is that we've got millions and millions of these 410 pages. So kind of on a monthly basis, Google is still crawling these pages, which isn't ideal. So I think if we'd known about long-term memory before, it would have really helped us to communicate more to the business. From a de-indexation point of view, I kind of thought that within about 48 to 72 hours, all of our 410s would be de-indexed. And I think that was kind of the consensus I got speaking to others in the industry. But actually, I don't think that took account for the amount of time it would take Google to crawl through all the URLs. I personally expected a big jump in crawl demand because we were making quite a big change to our website, but actually really that didn't happen. Google still crawled at the same rate. So as a result, it took longer for Google to de-index the pages. As I mentioned throughout the talk, Google is crawling our 410s again and again and again. And I think something really important to bear in mind if you're looking to do this project. I have spoken to others in the industry and it's a mixed bag. Some are finding that Google crawls for 410s frequently, others not so much. But in our case, at least, it's been a big problem. And if we'd known about it at the start, it may have kind of influenced the way we went about the project. And then crawl improvements are not linear. And what I mean by that is our crawls fluctuate over time. So really the peak of our Venn diagram occurred in August, as I showed earlier. But in September, we saw kind of a slight reduction in Google crawling our valuable pages, as you can see here. So I think we were about 82%. And I think it's just important to recognize that seasonality is at play here. And just because you improve your crawl budget doesn't mean it's just going to keep improving slowly but steadily. I think it's kind of fluctuates. From a research perspective, I'd urge you, if you think you found the answer, to keep looking. I think, as I mentioned earlier, if we'd known about Google's long-term memory, we wouldn't have we would have known, and we'd have been able to communicate to the business, which would have been really handy. That said, we still were able to communicate, but I think if we just spent a little bit longer researching, we would have come across answers a little bit faster. And then finally, you can research all day long, but I would recommend being led by your data and making a judgment call based off that, because I think from what I can tell, every website is different and the way that Google interacts with it changes as well. That's all from me. Thank you really very much for listening. I've been David Lewis of Trainline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. That was a lot of very useful information that you shared with us. I was very surprised what you said about, Google actually has a very, very long-term memory, and you actually had to do a lot of extra steps to delete it or to prevent it from recrawling those pages that you had, was it 410 or and removed from the sitemap?
Sorry, Joe, I just lost you for a second there.
I was just saying that it was very surprising to find that basically Google had such a long-term memory. So I just wanted to clarify to the viewers that 410ing the pages didn't work, removing them from the sitemap didn't work. So what was it that you should, or if you had known what you've done from the beginning?
So I think 410ing did work. It just wasn't as fast as we thought it would be. So I think my assumption going into this project was 410 is an extremely strong signal, and Google is going to kind of respect that and then basically just almost forget about these pages. I think if it had gone that way, then crawl share would have just gone, for valuable pages, would have just gone up to the right, but that didn't really happen. What we saw written in the industry was kind of different from what we saw in our data. That's why I kind of mentioned that point around being led by your data. And I think if we'd known that before, we may not have done anything different, but it just would have given us a better way of communicating with the business that this improvement in crawl share may just take a little bit longer. I mean, we actually put those 410s in place about 11 months ago, and Google is still calling those 410s. We've improved crawl share from 64% to around 85%. So that it's been a significant improvement. It's just taken longer than we thought. Okay,
so therefore, to confirm, the 410s did work, but they took a lot longer than you had expected it to.
Yeah, exactly.
And because of having all these pages deleted or not also being visible in the SERPs, you actually saw a big increase in your rankings.
Yeah, that's right. And that was, problem is because we did this in COVID, it took a lot longer for that to kind of be applied. But really, I think from our case, the biggest win from a ranking perspective was improving our internal linking architecture. And that's kind of an unsung hero of this project. And that change came in June 2020. So really, that's been in for nearly 18 months now. And we found that as kind of demands come back in the rail industry, we've seen that improvement in ranking as a result.
Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. Yes, when you were doing this project, people were not really allowed to travel. So can you say that you have now seen not just improvement in ranking, but also improvement in traffic and conversions now that people are able to purchase train tickets?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not able to say the numbers themselves, but yeah, we have definitely seen a correlation between the improvement in rankings and traffic and revenue, which is great. So yeah, it's definitely been a major success, and I think we want to take these learnings forward into our UK market going into next year.
Great. Well, thank you. Serena, do you have any questions for David?
I've got a few things that are written down. I was curious about the decision to serve a 410 as opposed to maybe like 301 redirecting it straight to the home page. Could you sort of talk about why that is, or the benefits of both, I suppose?
Yeah, so I think we just wanted it to be a hard signal. I think that's why we chose the 410s. I think if we had the redirect, then it may affect kind of our servers and things, whereas the 410 is like, it's gone and that's that. And we knew these pages wouldn't come back, whereas we felt that the redirect was more of a kind of another step. So I think I saw it as we could have done a redirect and then 410, but instead of doing that, we just orphaned and then 410. But it was really just to get that hard signal. I think from the research we did, we thought that to prevent crawling, 410s would be the best way. You know, when we've done migrations in the past, we've seen that Google is still coming back to some of our old CCTLDs. So we know that Google is calling those 301s. So we kind of use that insight to make a decision here. And now we're at a case where Google's calling the old 301s and the 410s,
but the 410s kind of to a lesser extent. So I think it was still a good decision to go with the 410s.
Oh, cool. That makes sense. And part of the orphaning process as well, I was curious how difficult it was to do it en masse, because obviously there's millions of URLs, identifying all of those URLs and then actually removing all the internal links to them and orphaning them. How was that done, like practically?
It was done through the devs, which is great. So we kind of did it in the reverse. So we knew all the pages that were valuable, and we basically took those lists and built our new architecture off those. And any of the old pages that weren't part of it were basically just removed. So instead of kind of working on the same architecture, we just created a whole new set of architecture. And we did have orphan pages in the CMS. Links to these pages in the CMS. I can't remember how many, couple of thousand maybe. So it did take us and the team some time to get rid of those, and that's why we needed to wait for 6 months between the two, because we wanted to be confident that when we deleted these pages, they were completely gone. Because we thought that if we're internally linking to 410s, that is a terrible signal to Google.
That actually leads me perfectly to my last question, which was when building the new architecture and deciding which pages which weren't valuable anymore, how was that in terms of the fight against the rest of the teams in terms of keeping that sort of content? I would imagine, you have the social team and there's a whole bunch of pages which are owned by loads of different parts of the company, or was it quite a seamless process?
It was pretty seamless, actually. We spoke to PPC because obviously they use these train times pages, but these train times pages won't really be used by any other teams, or specifically anyway. And the routes that we deleted were really random routes. So for example, that see something medium one I mentioned earlier, like in Spanish, that was just almost a dead page. No one had ever visited it, basically. So I think from that perspective, it wasn't really too much of a problem. We did get the analysts involved as well, just to triple check that we were not deleting pages that had value in some place. But yeah, it wasn't too much of a fight. The main fight would be just getting the work prioritized. And that's why it was really important that we kind of educated on the importance of the project. And obviously, thankfully, we've actually seen some good results, and that stands us in good stead for future projects.
Awesome. No, thanks so much. That's all my questions I have for you. And thanks so much for the presentation. I'm a big fan of the purple circle.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize the fact that what you actually just said just now is that everybody was on board on this project. You also got the dev team to triple check all the pages, as in what's been used and what hasn't. But just pointing out, you mentioned Botify as well. So you basically had a third-party tool, as in you didn't just use Google Search Console. You used Botify to help you to crawl all the pages to then be able to see what's indexed and what isn't. So one last question: how important was it to use a tool such as Botify, or of course you could use something like DeepCrawl2 to use this in line with your Google Search Console and or Google Analytics?
Absolutely essential, in my opinion. We've spoken about this quite a lot internally, and if we didn't have Botify or DeepCrawl or OnCrawl, any of the other big enterprise crawlers, we would not have confidence in this project, because, well, for starters, it gave us a view on the crawls Venn diagram. So what Google is crawling, what we're crawling, and where the sweet spot is. But also just being able to monitor as well. Obviously, we had the log data in Botify, with all the crawl data. And I think without it, it would be very difficult. I mean, if it was on a smaller scale, I think Screamer Frog would work well. So I know you can do logs in there as well, but I think from our perspective, it was absolutely essential. And I definitely wouldn't have been undertaking the project without it.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David. Yes, I think by having the tools, by having the platforms and having everyone on board, like for you, what you said, Serena, it's really paramount to be able to implement a new strategy and to actually start up a new project. So it's great to see that you can do two such big projects, very different ones, but with both instances, you had the support of your team. So a big thank you to the Trainline for sponsoring Search London. I do like the Trainline, even outside of them sponsoring, because they are very useful in if you want to book anything for traveling within Europe, and their customer service is excellent as well. Whenever we've had issues with the train strikes, they've always been very helpful. So thank you, Trainline. If you have any questions for David, you can get hold of David on LinkedIn. Serena's also on LinkedIn as well as on Twitter, Excel Daddy. I'm SEO Joe Blogs. Some of you may have seen me as well on TurnDigi, and I'm a freelance marketing consultant. Tim is at the event on November the 4th. Hopefully I can attend in some format. But for those who are joining us here by a video, please email us or Twitter at searchldn or myself at SEO Joe Blogs if you have any further questions. But without further ado, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone for turning up to our video of our Search London event. And the one in London is actually our first event since March 2020. We hope to have a 11th birthday party maybe in February or March in 2022 to celebrate, of course, our Search London turning 11 years old. So big thank you to everyone for supporting us. We now have just over 2,500 members. Yay! So thank you very much, everyone. I'm just going to end the broadcast, but please feel free to reach out to Serena on Twitter or LinkedIn, or David on LinkedIn if you have any further questions, because there was a lot to follow up with. Of course, anyone that has RSVP to Search London will get this video direct to their inbox as well as the slides. Thank you very much.